One more thing before we start. If you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. St. John's versus Connecticut. This matchup already feels like a grudge game, with one team walking and remembering exactly how it got punched in the mouth the first time around and the other walking and thinking it can do it again. The earlier meeting at the Garden still stings, because those 15 giveaways and the beating on the glass were not random. They were the result of pressure that never really let up and foul trouble that kept key pieces from ever getting comfortable. That kind of game lives in a locker room, especially for a group that is used to dictating terms, not reacting to them. Since then, the storylines have split a bit. St. John's has turned into the hot show, stacking wins, playing with that confident swagger you get when your style travels and your pressure looks the same on any court, whether it is New York or a quiet midweek road spot. UConn has taken a different road, leaning into that balanced identity, scoring enough to keep up with anyone but quietly building a reputation for making teams miserable on the defensive end, especially when the crowd is loud and every defensive stop feels like a small avalanche. It is not just numbers on a box score, it is the feeling of possessions getting longer, shots getting tougher, and opponents starting to look over at the bench for answers that are not really there. The building itself matters here too. Hartford is not just another venue on the schedule, it has become a place where visiting teams know they are not just dealing with 5 players, they are dealing with thousands of people who have been waiting all day to scream at them. You can feel that extra edge on nights like this, especially with seniors taking the floor for the last time at home, families in the stands, and that weird mix of nostalgia and urgency hanging in the air. Players do not always talk about it in press conferences, but you see it in the way they crash a loose ball or fight through a screen a little harder than usual. The coaching angle matters just as much as the emotion. In the first game, St. John's pressure turned the ball into a live grenade. Now there is a full stack of film on how that pressure came, which traps hurt the most, which passing angles disappeared, and which rotations fell apart when the ball went to the wrong spot. You can almost hear the message in practice: keep the ball safe, do not bail anyone out with lazy passes, and make them guard in the half court for longer stretches. When a staff with this kind of track record gets a second look at the same style, it usually comes with counters, wrinkles, and matchups tweaked just enough to tilt the physical battle back their way. Health and depth quietly tilt things as well. St. John's losing a couple of depth pieces for the season trims the margin for error when foul trouble hits or when the game turns into a grind with lots of body blows in the lane. Having rotation guards listed as questionable adds another layer of uncertainty, because the whole identity of their style is built on waves of energy, fresh legs, and guards who can fly around without worrying about conserving minutes. On the other side, walking into a game like this with a clean injury report lets the home side lean into its full rotation, tighten it when needed, or push the pace in spurts without fear of running out of gas late. All of that, the revenge angle, the emotional charge, the home crowd, the fresh adjustments to that pressure-heavy style, and the cleaner health picture, points to one side having a better chance to control not just who wins, but how wide the gap ends up on the scoreboard. As our first pick for this matchup, the Connecticut Huskies to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. On raw season numbers, both offenses can absolutely fill it up, and if you just looked at points per game and recent margins, you might assume this matchup turns into a track meet where whoever has the ball last gets the final word. It is tempting to think like that, especially when one team thrives in chaos and the other quietly has the firepower to answer every run with one of its own. The recent big wins for both sides paint a more patient picture though. St. John's did not just outscore Creighton in a wild race, it basically smothered them, turned shots into prayers, and stretched a close game into a blowout by squeezing the life out of every possession. UConn did something similar to Villanova, not by racing up and down, but by slowly choking off clean looks and forcing contested jumpers that feel like they are being shot through fog. Those kinds of wins are loud on the scoreboard, but they are built on control, fouls drawn, and a lot of possessions that never really get into a pure run-and-gun rhythm. Here is the thing, pressure can actually slow a game down as much as it speeds it up. When traps come early and often, offenses take extra time just to get into their sets. The ball gets reversed one more time, screens get reset, and coaches shout out adjustments from the sideline like traffic cops at a busy intersection. The clock keeps ticking. Even when turnovers happen, they are not always instant fast breaks. Sometimes they are ugly scrambles, loose ball tie-ups, or fouls that send everyone back to a dead ball situation. The stakes on the calendar nudge the pace down too. With league titles and seed lines on the line, coaches naturally tighten rotations, trust their veterans, and lean into the kinds of possessions that look boring on a highlight reel but beautiful to anyone who cares about winning in March. Freedom gives way to structure, quick pull-up threes give way to post touches, and players start to understand that a good shot with 10 seconds on the clock is not as valuable as a great shot with 3. That subtle shift, from entertainment to control, quietly shaves points off the total even when both teams still have the skill to light it up. Most analytic models sitting around this game hint at the same contour, both teams landing in the 70s, not the 80s, which puts the final number in a range that is exciting but not wild. If you imagine long defensive possessions, some cold stretches where both sides are feeling the nerves, and a closing stretch filled with deliberate half-court sets instead of constant helter-skelter, the path to a slightly lower scoring outcome becomes pretty clear. The market often remembers the tempo and the brand names more than the kind of high-pressure, high-leverage environment that tends to drag games into a more measured rhythm. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Florida versus Texas. Florida heading into Texas has that midweek chaos vibe where you flip the game on for a few minutes and suddenly you are locked in for the full 40. The Gators walk into the Moody Center with a record that looks like a contender, something in the 21-6 type range and a strong conference mark to match, while Texas sits closer to a 17-10 sort of profile, scrapping for resume points and trying to keep the season from slipping into bubble territory. Florida plays with a very clear personality, pedal pressed down, and absolutely no interest in coasting. They score in the high 80s on average in conference play, and they do it while stacking a scoring margin that makes it feel like they are flipping the slider on a video game, and the rebounding edge looks just as rude, with a double-digit advantage on the glass that turns missed shots into extra chances over and over. It is not just numbers, it is the way it feels, long bodies crashing the boards, guards pushing right away, and opponents constantly backpedaling. Texas, under Sean Miller, leans into offense as well, only in a slightly more chaotic way. The Longhorns put up mid-80s themselves with clean shooting percentages, but their opponents are still hanging in the mid-70s against them, which tells you plenty about how often that defense springs a leak. One night you get a wild track meet where they sneak out a narrow win by just outgunning someone, and a few days later you see them give up something in the neighborhood of 90 points on scorching opponent shooting, and everyone in burnt orange looks frustrated. That Jekyll and Hyde stretch we just saw, with one breathless win and one game where the opponent lit them up, sums up the tension with this Texas group perfectly. Florida, on the other hand, has spent February throwing big point totals at big names and walking away smiling. They dropped triple digits on Alabama, flirted with 100 against Kentucky, and pushed past the mid-90s against Ole Miss, and those did not feel like fluky hot shooting nights. They felt like a team that knows exactly where its shots are coming from and exactly how it wants to punish you if you cannot match the physicality. Health tilts things a bit too. Florida shows up with a clean report, no key names tagged, nothing to really spook you before tip-off. Texas mainly has that lingering question around reserve forward Lassina Traore, who sits in that gray area where he is close enough to show up around the rotation but not fully locked in as 100%. It is not a headline by itself, but for a team that already leans hard on a core group, every uncertain minute matters. The matchup picture that comes out of all this is pretty straightforward, even if the game itself might feel wild. Florida brings the sturdier defense, the nastier edge on the glass, the cleaner bill of health, and a recent history of turning big spotlight games into wins that look comfortable by the time the final horn sounds. Texas brings real firepower and a home crowd that will absolutely be loud, but also a defense that has been stretching, bending, and sometimes breaking for a long stretch of the season. The market reflects that by treating Florida as the clear favorite even on the road, giving Texas some respect at home but not quite enough to erase the gap in consistency. In a likely script, the first half feels competitive and high energy, then Florida's size, depth, and board control start to show as legs get heavy, foul trouble nibbles at the shorter Texas rotation, and those last few minutes tilt toward the Gators managing space rather than scrambling to steal it back. As our first pick for this matchup, the Florida Gators to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. On paper, both offenses have all the tools to push a game well into that high-scoring neighborhood. Florida has been living in the upper 80s in conference play, and Texas is parked in the mid-80s overall, so you are talking about two groups that are used to seeing big numbers on the scoreboard. Their opponents are not exactly getting shut out either, hanging in the low to mid-70s on average, which hints at a style where trading buckets is the norm rather than the exception. This is not a slow, grinding half-court battle. It is two teams that want to get shots up early in the clock. Both squads are comfortable attacking the rim, forcing contact, and stacking free throws, which quietly adds a ton of points over 40 minutes. If you have watched much college ball, you know how ugly and beautiful a long parade to the line can be. Not fun for neutral nerves, very fun for a total that leans high. Texas keeps feeding into that script lately. They just played back-to-back high-stakes games that turned into full-track meets, one where they edged out a tight win with a total north of 170 points, and another where their opponent tagged them for around 90 while the Longhorns still scored plenty themselves. Those results were not just outliers, they looked like natural consequences of an elite offense combined with a defense that gives up clean looks and a tempo that says, "We are not walking this up." Florida's road trips tend to follow a similar rhythm. They do not mind if the game's speed picks up because they trust their depth, their foul drawing, and their ability to keep winning the extra possessions battle through rebounding and turnovers. If you keep giving a team like that more chances, more shots, more trips to the stripe, the totals start climbing and they rarely slow down just because the opponent is scoring too. There is always a tiny chance that one team blows the game open and milks clock for the last few minutes. That is the one scenario that can spook people off a high total, the fear of 5 minutes of walking the ball up and empty possessions. But here, Texas is in a spot where it needs a statement, so if the game starts to slip, you can almost bank on late fouls, quick threes, and a refusal to quietly accept a double-digit loss at home. That kind of desperation usually means more possessions, more trips to the line, and more scoring piled on late, not less. So the most reasonable expectation is a fast pace from the jump. Plenty of whistles, both offenses staying aggressive instead of conservative, and a scoreboard that keeps flipping and flipping right up until the final handshake. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Georgia versus Vanderbilt. Memorial Gym in Nashville has that quirky old arena vibe where the benches sit on the baselines and every run feels a little louder than it should. The building itself almost tilts toward the home side, and Vanderbilt comes in with a shiny record that reads 21-6, ranked, confident, and expected to handle business as the favorite. Across from them you have Georgia at 19-8, rolling in with that slight chip on the shoulder that always tags along with the underdog, especially after a fresh 91-80 win over Texas where the shots were falling like the rim was twice its normal size. On the surface, it looks like the classic story, solid home favorite, good record, tough building, but underneath that simple headline, the matchup leans a lot friendlier toward the team catching points. Georgia plays fast, not just they like to run fast, more like top 10 in the country in tempo, around 77 trips up and down the floor per night fast, and that kind of constant motion turns a normal game into a roller coaster with extra laps tacked on. They average 90.2 points a night, sitting among the top offenses in Division I, and when a team lives at that pace, the door for wild swings, double-digit comebacks, and late backdoor covers never really shuts. You know that feeling when you are watching a game, you think the favorite is safe, and then the last 90 seconds become a track meet with one team pressing and firing threes, and suddenly those points you were laying feel very thin. Georgia is exactly that kind of chaos agent. Vanderbilt can absolutely score, and they are not some passive passenger in this game, but their defense lines up closer to good enough than lock the whole thing down. They give up 73.7 points per game and sit outside the top tier in scoring defense, and against a fast, aggressive offense that likes to probe every crack, those small leaks can become long runs. Georgia's pressure tends to force more than 14 turnovers per game, and they draw around 19 fouls a night, which is not small talk when you compare it to a Vanderbilt side that commits close to 20 fouls per contest. That kind of whistle profile is where spread tickets live and die, because every extra trip to the line for the underdog is a free chance to chip away, even if the game script itself feels tilted toward the home team. There is also the very human side of this matchup, and honestly, that matters as much as any spreadsheet. Georgia is not just coming off a win, they are coming off a statement-type night against Texas where they dropped 91, shot close to 60% from the field, and splashed 11 threes, which is the kind of performance that sticks in a locker room's memory for a while. Guard Jeremiah Wilkinson, who is firmly on Georgia's current roster, poured in 19 in that game and carries himself like a player who expects to score and expects his team to run with anyone. On the other side, Vanderbilt is walking in from a grind of a 69-65 loss to Tennessee, a reminder that even in that funky home gym they can be dragged into a fight that goes the full 40 and does not end on their terms. Put all that together and you have a favorite that can still play well yet struggle to create real separation against an underdog that thrives in speed, leans into pressure, and has every reason to keep throwing punches right to the horn. As our first pick for this matchup, the Georgia Bulldogs to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Now zoom in on the total, because we're talking about a number that most college games never touch, yet this particular pairing is built for a scoreboard that barely gets to rest between possessions. Georgia plays offense like someone turned the sliders up in a video game, putting up 90.2 points per contest and allowing 78.4, with a tempo that sits in the national top 10 and a defense that ranks way down at 305th in points allowed. That combination of relentless pace and leaky resistance is basically an open invitation for both sides to pile on possessions and shots. Vanderbilt fits into that script nicely because they are not shy on offense either. They score 87.2 points per game, hit about 48% of their shots from the field, and knock down nearly 78% at the stripe, which means a lot of their trips end with something positive on the board rather than empty trips. Their pace sits in that top 50 range with around 74 possessions, so they are comfortable playing in rhythm instead of grinding out half-court slugfests. Point guard Tyler Tanner, firmly on Vanderbilt's current roster, has been steering one high-scoring night after another, averaging 18.6 points and 5.3 assists and headlining wild box scores like 96-90 against Alabama, 98-94 against Florida, 92-91 against Oklahoma, and 105-93 at UCF, the kind of results that make overbettors feel like they are watching a pinball machine. Georgia's recent 91-80 win over Texas fits right into that same pattern, a reminder that when they share a floor with another capable offense, things tend to snowball on the scoreboard. Here is the thing that really matters if you care about points, the foul game and the free throws. Georgia pulls about 19 fouls per game from opponents, Vanderbilt whistles in nearly 20 of their own, and both squads actually punish those fouls with strong free throw shooting, Vanderbilt around 77.6% and Georgia close to 74.9%. Anyone who has sweated a total knows how those last 2-minute stretch, with intentional fouls, quick possessions, and free throws turning what looked like a quiet ending into a rush of late scoring. This matchup has all the ingredients for that kind of finish, because neither side is built to shut things down cleanly and both can force the other into tough, foul-heavy stretches. The usual killers of a big total are slow pace or a defense that drags the game into the mud, and neither shows up as the main character here. Both offenses are at home in the 80s, both tempos sit well above average, and the defensive setups look more like you score, we will answer, than you are not getting anything easy tonight. If the game stays even moderately competitive, the chances of a long, choppy ending with extra possessions, free throws, and maybe even bonus time do not feel far-fetched at all. So you are looking at a contest where the style, the track records, and the foul tendencies all pull in the same direction toward a night where the scoreboard crew has plenty of work to do. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Maryland versus Nebraska. Maryland heads into Lincoln to face Nebraska on a late February night, and it really feels like two seasons colliding in the same arena, one cruising, one searching for a heartbeat. Nebraska sits at 23-4 overall and 12-4 in conference play, sitting inside the top tier of the national rankings, while Maryland shows up at 11-16 and 4-12, still figuring out who it wants to be. The building itself matters here because Pinnacle Bank Arena has turned into one of those spots where visiting teams rarely feel comfortable, and Nebraska treats home games like a weekly statement game rather than just another date on the schedule. Nebraska has built exactly the sort of profile that usually handles big favorite roles without flinching. They average around 78 points per night while giving up only about 66, which gives them a steady double-digit scoring cushion across the season, not just in a few blowout wins. The numbers behind that are not just empty calories. They share the ball at around 18 assists per game, keep turnovers under 10, and knock down close to 11 threes per outing at a mid-30s percentage from deep. That combination of spacing, ball security, and shooting is the basketball version of having cruise control, lane assist, and a full tank all at once, and it lets them pull away gradually rather than relying on wild spurts. The way they play on offense fits that profile perfectly. Nebraska uses a 5-out style that lifts bodies away from the paint, stretches opposing bigs toward the perimeter, and forces constant decisions on help and recovery. They love early threes in space, they cut hard behind overhelping defenders, and when a defense is even a half step slow, the ball simply finds the open shooter in the corner like it was scripted. It sometimes resembles an NBA-style attack more than a traditional college offense, with more threes than twos on some nights, which is uncomfortable for any opponent that is not fully locked in on every possession. Defensively, this is not some carefree, trade bucket for bucket group. Nebraska sits around 65 to 66 points allowed per game, landing them among the better scoring defenses in the country. They use length on the wings, they contest on the perimeter, and they make simple things like post entries feel complicated. Their one obvious soft spot shows up on the offensive glass, where they rank near the bottom of the conference, but that weakness is partly by design, because when shooters are spaced around the arc, there are fewer bodies near the rim to chase misses. The trade-off is clear, fewer second chances for them, but cleaner spacing and more transition chances when they do secure the ball. Maryland walks in with a very different statistical story. They score just over 71 points per game, but allow roughly 77.5, which leaves them underwater by about 6 points a night across the full season. That is not the profile of a team quietly hiding in extra gear. From the field, they sit around 41%, low 30s from 3, and on defense, they allow opponents to shoot close to 47% overall and almost 37% from long range, which is exactly the wrong kind of weakness against a team that lives behind the arc. When you combine a negative scoring margin with a leaky perimeter defense, hanging around against a high-quality offense for 40 minutes becomes a pretty tall task. There has been some recent improvement on the Maryland side, with a small run of wins that shows they are still competing and not mailing in the closing stretch. A new coaching staff is trying to build something, and you can see patches of progress in their effort and energy. The problem is that the same reports that praise their growth also highlight the same recurring issue, guarding the three-point line with any real consistency. Against a Nebraska team whose shot diet tilts toward the perimeter and whose spacing makes rotations brutally honest, that weakness can snowball fast. Home and road splits only deepen that concern. Nebraska has been excellent at home with only a couple of stumbles, and they have already shown they can handle large favorite tags without tightening up. Maryland, by contrast, has taken some heavy losses when facing the better teams in the conference on the road, the kind of defeats where the score gets away from them in the middle portion of the game and never really comes back. Even with earlier injuries baked into season-long numbers, the current core rotations on both sides are expected to be available, which means the matchup should look a lot like what the season data has already hinted at. In spots like this, casual bettors sometimes get nervous about big spreads, but the deeper you look at the way these two teams are built, the more it feels like the favorite has the tools to stretch things out over 4 or 5 mini runs rather than relying on one big knockout punch. As our first pick for this matchup, the Nebraska Cornhuskers to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. On paper, a high-powered home offense facing a struggling road team can look like a recipe for a game where the scoreboard barely gets a break. Some projections land in that familiar range where one side sits in the low 80s and the other hovers in the low 60s, which sounds lively at first glance. The trick is that those numbers assume both sides cooperate, and recent performance hints that one of them might have a hard time keeping up its end of the bargain. Nebraska's calling card on the other side of the ball is still its defense. Holding opponents to somewhere around 65 or 66 points per game across this many contests is not a random hot streak, it is a habit. They wall off the paint, they use length to bother jumpers, and they push opposing offenses deep into the shot clock. That sort of structure tends to pull games into pockets of slower, more deliberate possessions, especially when the opponent does not have a reliable way to generate easy looks. Maryland's offense fits awkwardly into that environment. They average just over 71 points per contest, but you can feel how streaky that number is hiding underneath. Against better defenses, their efficiency tends to sag rather than spike. Even when they manage to get to the foul line, which can sometimes help totals creep upward because the clock stops, that advantage is harder to lean on away from home. Trips into traffic can become turnovers, charges, or wild shots instead of steady free throws, and empty possessions stack up quickly against a disciplined half-court defense. Nebraska, ironically, carries an offensive style that looks explosive but often tilts toward a controlled rhythm. They fire a lot of threes, and their spacing can make a single stretch feel like a video game where the sliders are turned up, but they are also comfortable running through their sets, reversing the ball, and hunting the cleanest look rather than the quickest one. Analysts who have broken down their season have talked about how their five-out look creates a kind of half-court chess match with cuts, relocations, and red-based actions that take time to unfold. That approach can absolutely create efficient scoring, but it does not always speed the game up into a full track meet. Game flow adds another layer. When one team gradually builds a comfortable margin, coaches often nudge the pace downward without even saying much. Possessions stretch out, the team ahead shows a little more patience, and the trailing side can press into tougher shots that drop the overall efficiency on both ends. Later in games, bench players usually see more time, and while that can occasionally spark chaos scoring, it more often leads to less organized offense, more solo plays, and more misses. Total bettors know that these long, quiet stretches in the second half can matter more than the early burst of energy in the first 10 minutes. There is of course a path where hot shooting on one side and a surprisingly clean night from the other pushes things higher than expected. Basketball has nights where every semi-open three feels like it is going in, and Maryland is not completely incapable of catching a rhythm. The more grounded scenario, though, looks like one where a strong defense continues doing what it has done all year. A shaky offense struggles to reach its usual averages in a tough environment, and the overall scoring lands a notch below what those more optimistic projections suggest. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.